The day my life changed forever didn't feel special at all. It was a Tuesday, late afternoon. The kind of day where the harmattan wind makes your lips crack and your throat feel dry no matter how much water you drink. I came home with my backpack slung over one shoulder, my head full of possibilities. I had applied for the international scholarship months earlier, and the results were supposed to come any day now. But I didn't know my any day had already come and gone. Our front gate creaked the way it always did, the sound I'd grown up with since my mother married Mr. Adeyemi and we moved into his house. My stepsister, Saad, was sitting on the veranda steps, scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up when I greeted her, just muttered something that could have been hi or go away. That was normal. What wasn't normal was the thin white envelope half-tucked into the back pocket of her jeans. The kind with the scholarship board seal printed in deep green ink. I didn't notice it then. I wish I had. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of my stepmother's lavender air freshener, and the TV hummed softly. There was no sign of my mother. She was at her shop. I dropped my bag and sat for a moment, staring at the wall clock. I told myself, maybe tomorrow. The letter would come tomorrow. But that night, I heard voices through the thin wall between our rooms. Sada's voice, hushed but sharp. She'll never know. I'll just say the list came out and her name wasn't there. Then my stepmother's softer, almost soothing reply. Good. She doesn't need to be far from home. It's better this way. I froze. My pen slipped from my fingers, rolling off the desk. My chest tightened. I wanted to push open the door, demand an explanation, but fear glued me to my chair. I told myself maybe they were talking about someone else. The next morning, Saad smiled at me for the first time in months. It was the kind of smile that didn't touch her eyes. She said she'd checked the results list at the cyber cafe, and I didn't make it. Her voice was syrupy with fake pity. I believed her. And just like that, the dream I had been building for years crumbled. I spent the next months working in my mother's shop, watching Saad prepare for her own university admission. She studied in the same chair where I once dreamed of my future. I didn't know then that the letter, my letter, was hidden in the bottom drawer of her desk, under old makeup palettes and half-used perfume bottles. I also didn't know that life had a strange way of keeping score. Because years later, I would see Saad again. Only this time, she would be sitting in the front row of a classroom, clutching her notebook, looking up at me. And I would be the one holding the chalk. The rain had stopped just minutes before I walked into the lecture hall, but the air still carried that damp smell of wet concrete and old wood. My heels clicked against the tiled floor, echoing louder than I expected in the sudden hush that fell over the room. First-year students always stared like that, wide-eyed, sizing up the lecturer who would set the tone for their semester. I was used to it. What I wasn't used to was her. Saad. Front row, second seat from the left, braids pulled into a bun, wearing a crisp white blouse that probably wasn't as spotless as her record. Her pen hovered in midair when she saw me. Her mouth parted just slightly. I saw the recognition bloom in her eyes, then the panic. I didn't flinch. Good morning, class, I began, setting my files on the desk with deliberate calm. I'm Dr. Fola Adeyemi. I'll be taking you through creative writing this semester. The name Adeyemi made her blink. She'd probably told her friends about her brilliant stepsister who never made it to university. She hadn't prepared for the possibility that I would be standing at the podium. I let the silence hang for a beat longer than necessary. The air felt charged, like a storm that hadn't broken yet. Before we begin, I continued, you'll be working on an initial assignment, a diagnostic piece to help me understand your writing voice. I picked up the chalk and wrote slowly across the blackboard, each word deliberate. The cost of stealing someone's dream, a ripple moved through the room. Curious glances, scribbled notes. But Saad, she froze. Her eyes stayed locked on the words like they were burning themselves into her mind. Her knuckles whitened around her pen. This is not about grades, I said, turning back to face them. It's about honesty. Tell me a story. It doesn't have to be true, but it does have to be real. I let my gaze drift over the rows of students before settling on her. Just long enough for her to feel it. Her lips tightened. She looked away first. For the next hour, I talked about narrative arcs, emotional beats, and the importance of truth in storytelling. My voice was steady, my notes crisp, but every so often, I could feel her watching me, like she was trying to read the edges of my smile. When the lecture ended, students shuffled out in clusters, some thanking me, others already lost in conversation. Saad stayed in her seat until the last body passed through the door. Then she stood, sliding her bag over her shoulder. Dr. Adeyemi, she said quietly, the name tasting strange in her mouth. Small world. I looked at her, really looked at her. She hadn't changed much, except for the confidence in her posture. But under it, I could see the flicker of something else, uncertainty. Yes, I replied, gathering my papers. But the world has a funny way of making people meet again, when the time is right. I turned to leave. Behind me, her voice followed, softer this time. So you're really my lecturer? I didn't answer. Because the truth was, she wasn't ready for what was coming next. The next lecture hall smelled faintly of new paint and chalk dust. The morning sun streamed in through tall windows, casting long, slanted stripes across the rows of wooden desks. Students filed in slowly, clutching their notebooks and steaming paper cups of coffee. Saad came in last. She didn't look at me as she sat down, but I noticed the way her shoulders tensed. She had a notebook open before her, the pen poised, though I doubted she was ready to write what I'd asked for. I gave them 30 minutes of instruction before saying the words they'd been waiting for. All right, it's time. You have until the end of the period to complete your piece on the cost of stealing someone's dream. A few students immediately bent over their papers. Others stared into space, searching for inspiration. Saad stared at her blank page. I paced slowly between the rows, my heels soft against the worn wood. I glanced at her desk as I passed. She had written only the title, and her fingers gripped the pen so tightly her knuckles were pale. This is a safe space, I said to the room, my voice carrying just enough to make her hear it differently. The truth has a way of freeing us, even if it's ugly. She swallowed but didn't lift her head. I made my rounds, stopping now and then to answer questions. I could feel her unease every time I stepped near. It wasn't guilt written on her face, not yet, but recognition. Recognition that the prompt had been aimed like a dart, and it had hit the bullseye. By the end of the session, papers began stacking on my desk. Saad walked up slowly, her hand trembling just enough for me to notice as she placed her sheet on top of the pile. I didn't look at it. Not yet. When the room was empty, I sat down at the desk, flipping through the submissions. Stories of stolen art projects, sabotaged sports tryouts, even one about a best friend stealing a crush. Then I reached hers. It was only half a page. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate. Some dreams aren't worth chasing if they belong to someone else. But sometimes you take them anyway, because you can. You hide the evidence, bury it deep, and tell yourself they weren't going to make it anyway. You convince yourself it was mercy. And you sleep at night, because the dream is yours now, until the day it comes back to find you. There was no name on it. I sat there for a long moment, the words settling into my bones. She hadn't confessed outright, but she'd written enough for me to know. She knew I knew. The next lecture would be interesting, because I wasn't planning to grade her privately. By the third week of the semester, the students had started to relax. They came into class chatting, joking, leaning against desks. The first few awkward silences had given way to a low, comfortable hum. Perfect. Comfort was the best thing to disrupt. I walked in carrying a stack of papers, their assignments. A few students straightened up, probably expecting to get them back with neat red marks and a score out of 10. Not today. Instead, I set the stack down and leaned against the desk. We're going to do something different, I said. Today we read selected pieces aloud. No names attached. Just words. The rest of us will listen and respond. A few groans. A few curious glances. This exercise, I continued, isn't about grades. It's about owning the truth you've put on paper. I shuffled the stack deliberately, pulling out the one I'd placed on top earlier that morning. Half a page, sharp handwriting, no name. I didn't announce which student had written it. My voice was steady as I began. Some dreams aren't worth chasing if they belong to someone else. But sometimes you take them anyway, because you can. You hide the evidence, bury it deep, and tell yourself they weren't going to make it anyway. You convince yourself it was mercy. And you sleep at night, because the dream is yours now, until the day it comes back to find you. Silence. I let the words hang in the air. Then I asked, what do we think the narrator means by the day it comes back to find you? A boy in the back raised his hand. Sounds like guilt catching up with someone, he said. Another girl added, or maybe revenge. Like the person they stole from is still around. I nodded slowly, scanning the room until my eyes landed on Saad. She was staring straight at me, her face carefully blank, but I could see the way her chest rose and fell faster than usual. Interesting interpretations, I said, my tone light. Sometimes we write more truth than we intend to. I placed the paper down gently, like it was fragile, then moved on to another student's work. But the tension didn't fade, not for her and not for me. When class ended, students spilled out, laughing, debating the meanings behind each piece. Saad stayed behind again. She approached my desk slowly, like each step was a decision. "That was mine," she said. Her voice was quiet but firm. "The piece you read." I looked up at her, keeping my expression unreadable. "I know." Her jaw tightened. "What are you trying to do?" I smiled, not cruel but deliberate. "The same thing you did years ago, Saad." Her eyes narrowed. "And what's that?" "Change someone's future." I picked up my bag and walked past her, leaving the question and the unease behind. Because she didn't know yet that the next assignment was going to force her to choose between exposure and confession. The next week, the lecture hall buzzed with the energy of mid-semester. Students were juggling multiple courses, deadlines closing in from all directions. I could see it in the coffee cups clutched like lifelines and the tired eyes behind forced smiles. I walked in carrying only a single sheet of paper, the day's prompt, and no stack of lecture notes. That alone made them quiet down quickly. "Today," I said, setting the paper on the desk, "we're doing something different. No theory. No handouts. Just writing." A few students exchanged wary glances. Saad sat in her usual spot, eyes fixed on me, as if waiting to catch the shape of my next move. "This assignment," I continued, "is not fictional. It's personal. I want you to write about a decision you regret, something you'd change if you could. You don't have to give names, but it must be true." The air in the room shifted. Some students shifted in their seats. One boy let out a nervous laugh. I let the silence stretch until the tension began to hum. "You'll have 45 minutes, I said, passing slips of paper to each row. "No pretense. No hiding behind characters this time. The only person who will see your words is me." When I reached Sada's row, I placed her paper down with a little more weight than necessary. She looked up at me, just for a second, enough for me to see the flicker in her eyes. Pens began to move. Some scratched furiously, others hesitated, chewing on the tips. Saad sat still for the first 5 minutes, staring at the blank page like it was a mirror she didn't want to look into. Then, slowly, she began to write. I walked the aisles, speaking softly to students who had questions, offering encouragement. But my attention was fixed on the deliberate way her pen moved, pausing, starting again, crossing something out, then pressing harder. When time was up, I collected the papers. She hesitated a moment before handing hers over, her fingers lingering on the edge like she might snatch it back. I didn't read it immediately. I waited until the classroom was empty, the echo of departing footsteps fading. Her handwriting was familiar now, each letter sharp as if cut with a blade. The first sentence was simple. I stole something that didn't belong to me, and it changed the course of 2 lives. I read on. She never named me, but the details were all there. The letter, the scholarship, the deliberate lie. She described the rush of power she'd felt, the justification she clung to, the way she'd convinced herself it was harmless. And then the moment she'd realized it wasn't. The piece ended with, "If I could change it, I would. But it's too late." She's standing at the front of the room now, and she knows. I closed the paper slowly. This was no longer about a class exercise. It was time to decide what to do with the truth, and I wasn't going to keep it locked in my desk. It was late afternoon when I asked her to stay behind after class. The room was already empty, the last bits of sunlight spilling in through the windows, turning the dust in the air into a slow, glittering snowfall. Saad lingered near the door like she might pretend she hadn't heard me. But then she turned, walking toward my desk with the measured caution of someone approaching a cliff's edge. I didn't speak immediately. I slid the sheet of paper across the desk, her second assignment. Her eyes flickered down at it, then back at me. "So you read it?" "I did," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried a weight that made her shift uncomfortably. "You wrote it like fiction, but you and I both know it's not." She exhaled through her nose, a small, humorless laugh. "Is this the part where you humiliate me in front of the class?" "No," I said, leaning forward. "This isn't about humiliation. This is about truth. You cost me something I worked for my whole life. Do you have any idea what that did to me?" Her jaw tightened. "You think I haven't lived with that?" "Lived with it?" I almost laughed. You thrived because of it. You got everything I lost. And you never said a word. She dropped her gaze for a moment, her fingers curling around the back of the chair in front of her. I was young. Selfish. I thought maybe you weren't strong enough for it. The words hit harder than she probably intended. I straightened. You didn't get to decide that for me. Silence hung between us, heavy and jagged. Outside, the faint sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. I can't undo it, she said finally, her voice low. But if there's something I can do now, I cut her off. There is. She looked at me, eyes narrowing slightly. What? You're going to tell the story again, I said. This time in front of everyone. Her face paled. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm serious. You want to be in my class? You want to pass this course? Then you're going to stand in that lecture hall and read every word you wrote. She shook her head, a short, sharp movement. That's not fair. Neither, I said quietly, was stealing my future. I didn't wait for her answer. I picked up my bag, walked past her, and left her standing in the empty room. Because the next class was going to be the one she'd never forget. The lecture hall was full before I even arrived. Word had spread, not about what was going to happen, but that something was going to happen. Students sat forward in their seats, phones silenced but ready, sensing they were about to witness something worth remembering. I walked in carrying nothing but a single sheet of paper. The room fell quiet. Today, I began, we're going to hear a story. A true one. And the author is going to read it aloud. I turned toward Saad, who sat stiffly in the second row. Her face was pale, but her chin was high, that stubborn pride still clinging to her like armor. Come forward, I said. She didn't move at first. A few students glanced at each other, whispering. Then, slowly, she rose and walked to the front. The sound of her footsteps seemed to echo, even though the floor was carpeted. I handed her the paper. Whenever you're ready. For a moment, she just stared at the words she'd written. Her hands trembled slightly, and when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, but the room was so silent, every syllable carried. I stole something that didn't belong to me, and it changed the course of 2 lives. She kept reading. Her voice faltered in places, but she didn't stop. The details unraveled in front of 30 pairs of listening eyes. She didn't name me, but every word pointed straight at the truth. When she finished, there was no applause, just silence. A heavy, thick kind of silence that says we heard you, and we understand what it means. I stepped forward. Thank you, I said, my gaze steady on hers. That's the cost of stealing someone's dream. Not just the guilt. Not just the loss. But the fact that one day, you might have to stand in front of the world and own it. I turned back to the class. We'll continue next week. That was it. No discussion. No questions. I walked out, my heels clicking down the hallway. Behind me, I heard murmurs begin to swell. She'd told the truth, not for my forgiveness, but because there was no hiding from it anymore. As for me, for the first time in years, I felt like I had my own future back.